Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Tonight, it's Missouri Spring Creek Flies with Mike Swiderska, and we'll have a weekly tip, some easy dubbing, and we'll do that on one of our Spring Creek flies. But anyway, we're the Beaties from Boise, Idaho, and tonight we're really pleased to introduce all of you to Mike from Missouri. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his flies, and let me get him spotlighted first. Okay, there. Let me do an introduction on Mike. Mike told us in a recent email, what I enjoy most about fly tying and fly fishing is sharing the fun with others. Because I enjoy introducing the art of fly tying to others, I was asked to start a weekly instructional tying group that we call the Fly Tyers of the Long Table. This group of 10 to 20 tyers and others coming and going has now been tying for over 5 years. You can join us live on Zoom and watch the patterns tied from our group sessions on the YouTube channel with the same name. By the way, I really recommend going to the YouTube channel. You'll find some interesting stuff there. Both patterns that Mike is tying tonight are on the Fly Tyers of the Long Table channel. Tonight, let's welcome Mike for the first time to BT's Fly Tying Friday. Mike, you've got the vice.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that introduction and allowing me to come and demonstrate a couple of patterns. I really do appreciate it. So with that, I do want to state that the patterns I'm going to be tying tonight work very well in all of our trout parks here in the state of Missouri, mainly Bennett Springs, but Montauk State Park, Roaring River, and Merrimack. These patterns work good. If you're into very tiny, small creek fly fishing for wild trout, the Bennett Springs Killer and the Root Beery Merger, the two of the flies I'm going to tie tonight, work very well in our small spring creeks. So with that, I'm going to get started. And like Al said, please ask questions as we go. If I'm sure we can answer them, and let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is I want to discuss real quick. I'm going to be tying on size 20s. And with that, I work with my hands a lot. And so I use the regular glycerin on my fingers and keeping my fingernails and everything from snagging. I highly recommend, but the glycerin is the #1 ingredient in most of your hand lotions and stuff like that. So we're going to get started, and we're going to go ahead and start with the Root Beery Merger. And this is a somewhat of a dry fly. It was designed for Bennett Springs when everything else is kind of hard to do, because you can't see what the fish are eating. They're just ringing and slurping. And I'm sure that everybody is had that at one time or another and been able to throw all kinds of flies at them, and they just don't eat them. So I was thinking that they're eating something very small. So the theory behind this pattern and the chocolate covered cherry parachute pattern is a very, very small in diameter thorax. So with that, I'm going to first adjust my hook, and this is a 125 scud hook, size 20. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in and straighten it up. Now, this is not a clink hammer style, because if you know, on a clink hammer, the shank isn't straight on the backside, it's still curved. And then I'm going to come in and grab the front of the eye, one eye back behind it, and I'm going to gently grab and bend. And I'm going to make my eye equal to the point of my hook. So I put my hook in the vise where the hook is actually pointing straight out. And now I'm going to bend the eye down to equal that straight out and be parallel. There you go. With that, now you can see where the thorax and the abdomen is going to be tied on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and take my size 70 denier rusty brown and go ahead and start it right behind the eye. And I'm going to start it flat. And I'm going to get right to my bend and let it hang and go ahead and cut. And from here, I'm going to take my crystal flash, and it's root beer crystal flash. And I'm going to take one strand. So I've got 2 equal portions. And now what I'll do is I'll take it one more time and fold it in half, thus giving me 4 equal portions, and cut it in half. So holding those, I'm going to set them down for 1 second, get them out of my way. The next ingredient that I'm going to use is, because it's a size 20, I'm using extra small copper wire for the ribbing. One of the things that I like to do when I'm tying is if I can install more than one material at a time to save thread wraps on small flies, I will do that. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to take my wire and my crystal flash and put it all together and let it hang out the front of the fly. And I'm going to go ahead and counter spin. And now on my side, just gently wrap. Please also notice that my patterns are very simple. There's nothing hard. And now I'm going to lay a nice smooth thread base for the abdomen all the way down, touching wraps.
When you get to a break point, Mike, we do have a question.
Yes, go right ahead.
Oh, anyway, it's you mentioned spring creeks, but do you think these flies would work on picky western tailwaters also?
Real quick, he passed away, a very, very good friend of mine, Dan Ellman, fished it out west all the time when he was alive. And he had taken some of this pattern with him, and he was just going to fish him by himself, but he was with a guide. And him and the guide were fishing and struggling. And Dan said, "May I try something?" And so the guide said, "Of course." And the guide went ahead and let Dan put this pattern on. And then I don't remember what river or stream they were on, but they were in some fast, skinny water. And Dan threw this thing out, and they started picking fish up one after another. And today, this guide still ties this pattern. So I hope that answers that question. And so right now, the wire is actually, and let me pull it out, it should be coming off of, let me get this. It should be, there we go. It's coming off the bottom of the fly. So I'll get back to this one. We're almost done, actually. And again, all my patterns are very simple. And so with that, I'm going to now pull the top back, and I'm going to take that wire out from underneath, and I'm just going to go ahead and helicopter it, if I can, helicopter it off. Nope. All right. So I'm going to come in here with my anvils really deep and cut it. So I'm going to wrap with my wing up. Now I'm going to take my wire, and I hope you can see this, because on a rotary, I'll turn it a little sideways, but let me start it first. So I'll come off the bottom like that, and I'll come out, and I'm really trying to start my even segmentation. And for me, when I've got it in the rotary, I like to just kind of rotate it around to my side and look at the back side of the fly, so to speak, and just go ahead and do nice segmentation all the way up. Generally, it's going to be 5, and I'm going to come all the way to the top. And if you can see my segmentation, there it is. And I'm going to come right up where the abdomen is going to be.
What's the manufacturer of the hooks that you use?
Dairiki is what I've got right now. Oh, but you can't read it with my finger in the way. So I'm going to bring my wire, and the whole time I want to keep my fly nice and smooth, and I'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to come up, and I'll go ahead and wrap a couple of wraps around it. I don't want to overdo it. I just want to lock in that thread or that wire. I'm going to stick my thumbnail right under there and hold tight and helicopter real quick. So from there, I'm going to take my shuck. I always refer to this as a shuck and not really a tail, because it's kind of an emerger. So since it's a shuck, I want it the length of my body. So I'm going to lay my anvils right there and cut them for the length. Now I'm going to pull the wing back and cut it to the end of the tail. And there we have it. So now I'm just going to go ahead and shorten my thread up. Lock everything in. And I'm going to wrap one wrap right back over the top of that to get it to point backwards. And that's good. So from here, the final ingredient is going to be a sized brown hackle. And probably like everybody here, I tie a lot of dry flies. So I'm going to tie this thing in with the stem naked. I'm preparing first. So if you can see it, the stem is naked. And I'm going to do this dull side up. And I'm going to gently tie in that stem on my side. So let me come in at a 45. And I'm going to pull it out because I want a stem naked almost all the way around the shank of that hook. So I just bring my thread forward and I'm going to go ahead and wrap. So if you can see that naked stem, and it's just going to come around. And if you can see my hook point, that's how I know I created the right bend on it. I'm going to come straight up, and that's the beginning of my hackle. And each one of my flies will be the same if I use those parameters or whatever. So I give it 2, 3, and as I come up on my 4th one, and the reason, now we're all a little different, I'm sure, but the reason, notice that there's no barbules on the back side of this stem. They're all pointing forward. So now as I come up, my thread's going to be on the back side of that stem straight up, and then I can go ahead and let that thing down. And if you notice, I didn't capture any barbules whatsoever. And now I can come right behind it again with another one and one more. And I'm actually going right over the top of my own thread wraps. And I can come right in here. Instead of cutting, I'm going to leave it and I'm going to do a nice half hitch. You never know if something's going to go bad and it comes apart on you. And if you drop it right there next to that stem, and if you do your first half hitch and your hackle comes out and you've already cut it, well, you get to start over. But this way, you don't have to. So now I've got the head done, and I want to go ahead and create just a wee bit more head for shape. And I'm just going to come in here. This is nothing more than shaping that head that should be about the size of the eye back in length and the size of the eye in diameter. Touch, bring it right up and drop it in. I like to lubricate my half hitch just with a little saliva, and my thread sets down really nice, and we're good. Lay your anvils right there and done. So that is the root beer emerger. Fish it. This is a fly you are not going to see in the water. So you play to the ring, you play to the tug. I've had a lot of guys ask me, what is there another way? You can take your indicator, put it on the end of your fly line, right there where your leader is at. And if you're a good enough caster, you can actually have a great idea where your fly is at. And at Bennett Springs, the water is so doggone crystal clear that if the sun's hitting it just right, you'll actually be able to see this fly 20 plus feet away from you in the sun, even though it's designed to float well in the slime of the water, the film. You're not looking for this fly to float on top of the film. This is not a Catskill pattern. So I'm going to put this hook in here again. And if you notice, the eye in that is actually pointing downward. But that's because I'm making sure my point is sticking straight out. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next pattern. And what I'm going to do is come in. I do not have serrated jaws, by the way. No nicks in the hook. The nicks are what'll break a hook. So I'm just going to straighten it out. Okay, so I'm going to go back. Like I said, I'm going a little over one eye to a little over an eye in depth back. And I'm grabbing it and just bending. And I'm looking at my point. I'm going to try and move my fingers. And I'm looking at my point to know that so each one of my hooks is going to be the same between all my flies. I never want to look in my fly box and see one fly that doesn't look the same as the other, because I'll never fish it. So
So
there you
you
go.
want the little piece of shank right behind the eye, parallel to the point of the hook.
Correct. This sticking straight out, sticking straight out. Yes, sir. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over to a parachute, and this is a chocolate covered cherry parachute. And while I'm getting my materials, I'm going to give the background to this. There's a lot of guys, I believe, right now that's on with us tonight, Al, that are members of Ozark Fly Fishers, and they all know this gentleman. Very good friend, Al Borisaw. He's tied it to Salbug and all the other places. Al was an amazing tire. He passed away last August, and he's inspiration to me when it comes to tying. And he created a pattern called the chocolate covered cherry. Steve Antonik, I noticed, is on, who's very familiar with this pattern. But Al was a nymph fisherman, and his chocolate covered cherry was in the midge family, where it had a small bead on it, straight shank and all that. And it was very successful for Al at Bennett Springs and wherever else he fished. Well, anyway, I got to thinking about that pattern after Al passed, and we had the Ozark Fly Fishers outing at Bennett. And that's how I decided I was going to fish this one pattern all day, no matter what, in honor of Al. So I took his pattern, and Al ties the chocolate covered cherry, and I'm tying with the exact same materials that Al tied it with. And you can go to his YouTube channel and see that pattern. But anyway, the first thing I'm going to talk about is it's camel in color, and I'm using a size 6. I recommend, since I'm on a 20, to go to a size 8 or a 70 denier, but you want this color. This is called camel. It's not really showing the brown in this light again, but it's very important on his chocolate covered cherry. So I've created the hook, and this is going to be my parachute hook. And I'm going to start again, just like I did the last one, behind the eye. And I'm going to wrap back to the bend and cut my thread. So Al, in his pattern, he uses for the body this material right here. And this is what he wrapped the body with, like you would wrap thread down the shank of his hook. Well, he tied them on a little bit larger length hook and hook gap than I am. So I ran into the first thing, and that was I really didn't want to build the body up on this fly like I said on the other one. I've learned on all my emergers that to be successful in this crystal clear water here in Missouri, that I need very small bodies, not thick, heavy ones like you'd find on a Adams parachute. So I'm going to take that Mylar, that hologram stuff, hollow tinsel, and I'm going to lay it right on top of the hook shank. And I'm not going to wrap the hook shank with it like you would do thread like I just did. I'm going to get down the back side of the hook, and now I'm going to take my camel, and I'm going to take, like I said, and 70 would be so good, but I don't have it in this color. So I'm going to take this thread, and I'm going to tighten it up the best I can. And I'm going to do touching wraps. I'm going to do huge candy canes all the way down. I want that red to show between my thread wraps, just like a barber pole. And I'm holding that Mylar on the back side of the hook shank. And I'm going to come all the way down. If you can see the red, which I hope you can, I can. And I'm going to come down. And when I get to the bottom, I'm going to come around one time just to lock it in. And now I'm going to go right over the top of my same wraps because I don't want to cover that red. And I'm going to go ahead. So now, Al would.
Sorry.
Yes.
So when you put that holo tinsel on, you didn't wrap it. You just laid it over the top. Is that correct?
Yes. The actual material is wide enough to encompass the entire hook shank by wrapping it that way. Okay. So then I'm just going to kind of fuzz it up. That was one thing that Al, I think, said he never demonstrated on his YouTube video. Oh, I went too far. He fuzzes up, excuse me, he fuzzes up his thread to give it like little fuzzies when it's in the water. So I kind of do that. Now I get to the top, and I'm going to take some Zelon, not Antron. I've learned when I tie my parachutes that regular Antron holds water much more than Zelon, and I buy it in all the different colors. And so I've got the white, and I'm going to go ahead and take it. And I don't want to use a whole bunch, so I'm going to take that and cut it, kind of go up the middle of it and make it half as much. And you can take this and you can wrap it underneath like that if you want. I prefer to just go ahead and tie it in, and I will actually mention that why here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and tie straight in on the top, give it 1 to 2, and now I want to bring that right on top of my shank by picking it up and dropping it back down again. And what I'm doing is, I'm in my mind, okay, when I created the fly, I wanted to keep the abdomen thin, and I want to keep my thorax thin, and I want my thorax on top of the hook. And the reason for that, again, in my mind, I want the whole hook itself, including the eye, in the water below the film. I want the parachute on the top of the film. So if I got the Antron on top of the hook shank like you see it, then that puts my bulbous area of my thorax on top and not in the film in the water underneath. Again, does it matter? I don't know, it's me. So I come underneath, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this and create a nice bulbous area on top, and I'm going to contain it with the thread, come behind it because I want it to stand up to give me the length. And I'm going dull side up, and I'm going to tie it in on my side. But this time, because I'm doing a parachute like that, I made sure that my shank was the length of my parachute post and then some. Okay, it's just regular rooster, size 20, brown, dark brown hackle. It's the same that I use on the root beer. So I'm gonna turn my post back to me again, so I don't do what I just did.
Come on, you.
So like, I'm sure everybody knows this, but I do locking wraps too, and that keeps it from unraveling once I get to a certain point. So my post is done. Everything's about done. I'm going to wrap down now and lock it in. So I'm going to go ahead now on Al's pattern. He calls for a tag end, and I'm going to cut it. So the Mylar sticks out of the bottom, if you can see that, as a tag, and I'm going to go ahead and cut it a little shorter. There we go. Okay, so let's do our parachute. Touching wraps. There's the first wrap with no barbules on the stem.
Oh, okay.
And just keep wrapping down. I don't really count them. What I'm watching for, like everybody else probably does, I'm watching for my hackle to move. As soon as I touch that thorax, it'll move. So I hold it to my side, come up from behind and wrap right along. Touch the eye, come around the backside, touch the abdomen and come around, touch, down, touch, and then let it hang. And you can come right up under here and cut it. And now from here, we can just go ahead and do our half hitch. So in thinking that, this fly here, I like to have it undulate. So what I'll do is I'm going to, this is size 10, 1X long, 1X strong. And I like to use the lead free whatever wire, but the diameter of my wire, whenever I'm tying on my trout flies, and that is I try to match the diameter wire of my hook to the diameter wire of the material I'm going to use to weight it down. I'm going to tie by holding the tag on the top, underneath and over the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hold it, break it. And now I'm going to hold this and break it. So I'll go ahead and scrunch it up. And what I meant by undulating is I don't want the weight in the center of the fly. I don't want it all the way up in front like a bead. I want it, I'm going to say 2 eyes back. And what it does is it'll make my fly kind of go nose heavy. And as I strip it, it'll go up and down in the water like you would see a bat or a bass lure when them guys work them. So cover your lead. And I'm going to go ahead and make a nice taper behind and then wrap back. The taper for me is so that my material is easy to wrap up and over the lead. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. Now, if you notice, my thread's hanging right at the barb. All my flies, when I tie on a shank, their proportions are going to be at the barb. Okay, so the Marabou, and here's the thing. I've had a lot of people from across the country contact me, and they're using this fly for smallmouth down in Virginia and all, down in that warmer states. They're using them in creek fishing for smallmouth, but they're telling me that this is still the only color that is successful. And this is the olive brown Marabou. Let me get this. And I've had a lot of people from other states tell me they can't find it. I get mine, as you can see, it's hairline. But anyway, the color to me is very important. My thumb width is what I'm going to use no matter what, size 10, 12. And I'm going to rip off the stem, the width of my thumb, and I'll set that aside. Again, it's all about proportions. Each and every time the flies will come out the same. So now what I'm looking at for my tail is if you can see the very skinny parts of the end of them barbules, I do not like them. That's not what we're going to use for the tail. What we're looking for is where the thickness of the barbs are at sticking out. That's going to be the tail. So I'm looking on the length of my shank to where the barbules are at. And I'm going to go ahead and pinch. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of pinch everything together and tie it in on my side. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm talking. We need to add the next ingredient. My fault. And that is this right here. Hot orange. Hot spot orange is what it should be called. Let me go ahead and tie this in. And I'm going to keep it behind my lead. And it's going to get tied in underneath. So it comes off the bottom of the fly. Boom. Just like that. Done. Wrap back. Make sure it's on the bottom. Yep. Now you know how I measure. Two, three. I don't want a lot of thread holding this on because I don't want it to show through. I'm going to wrap forward. Now I'm going to take long length, take my pinky cradle. Do not make a rope out of this. A lot of guys like to twist and make ropes out of their Marabou, and just make it lay nice and flat on that shank and wrap forward. And because I created a nice ramp up over my lead, it went right over nice and neat. Come around the top. Don't crowd your eye, whatever you do. Come behind it. Marabou is very, very, very slippery. So it was asked about the antron. I'm actually tying a little head over the top of that Marabou because I don't like the way it might slip out. It has in the past because these are a multi-fish fly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm coming from underneath. One of the things about brass wire, copper wire, is warm it up with friction. If you never, if you're having a problem with your wire breaking, just kind of stroke it a little, get it warm, and that way all your molecules will line up and won't break for you. And go ahead and wrap. Nice large candy cane. This is really more about when that Marabou gets wet, this color shows through. I'm not worried if I pinch any of my marabou. This is a very ugly fly. I'm tying it to catch fish, not fishermen. Come around the front, pick it up, wrap behind it. Again, the wire is kind of slippery, so tie it back over the top of itself. Reach underneath. Pull everything back and create a nice head. There's no dressings, nothing on this fly. You just fish it, tie it on and hang on. Let me tie this off and we're not done. We got one more step. Oh, just caught some marabou. Okay, let's take the tail now and get rid of those ugly points. Come all the way out, break it off. Never cut your marabou tail. And you can see how nice and fuzzy it is all the way back to the end. Stroke your thumb over it a little bit. This is what I actually do after catching fish with it. I keep fishing it. I just go ahead and dry it off and then stroke my thumb over it and throw it back in. And that's it. Any other questions? You kind of see the color.
Okay, and you present that on the drift, on the swing, or what? Or everything, all the above?
All of the above. Mostly on the swing. And mostly on the swing and the strip. I really like it. It dries fast. It's very thin, soaks into the threads. It's a polyester UV glue, and I recommend it. I use it for so much my wife's ceramic stuff. Anything that glass that she breaks, I glue it back together with that.
Wow.
Well, it's time now for the tip of the week. And we talked last week about it being a real easy tip, and it's going to put us out of the dubbing business. Almost. Not quite, but almost. It'll put us out of the dubbing business for a couple of colors, because the only real hole in this particular dubbing process, if you will, is the lack of colors. And of course, we've got like 30 some colors in our different dubbing line, and you're only going to get 5 or 6 colors out of this particular process. And I got a few things here for just one simple fly that I'm going to do. And the yarn that we're using should be something that you recognize. It's acrylic Red Heart yarn, and we got this at the local box store. It would be Walmart or something similar. It's very inexpensive. It's a 4-strand, and we're going to just tear a strand out. And I've already separated them, so I didn't have to fiddle around trying to get that done. And so we got one strand. You see all those curls? Well, if you recall on the weekly tip several weeks ago, we showed you how to take those curls out, and I'm going to do that right now. First off, I'll get a hackle pliers, and on that end, and then I'll get another hackle pliers on the other end. My gun, which is a heat shrink gun. I got it at my favorite tool place called Harbor Freight. We use the gun to just take the kinks out of that. And now we'll just take the weight off of it. And as you can see, we just have a nice straight piece of yarn.
It does fuzz it out a little, which
Yep.
is kind of cool.
Well, that's
actually.
very cool when you actually get it in the water.
You
But
could actually use a hair dryer too.
yeah, the guy recommended the hair dryer on the low setting or on the high setting. I'm using the heat shrink gun on the lowest setting I've got, and just get a hook and set it in the vise. Now I'm going to tie this in a size 10 so you all can see the details really well. But probably the biggest I fish on any of the spring creeks that we've used it on is well, maybe a 14. Most of the time it's 16, 18s, and 20s. Let's see, I'm going to go back over here to the materials area. We're going to need to get a few more things. We got thread we're going to need, just standard 6/0 Danville. I'll put that over at the vise. And I've got some Antron body wool. I'm going to use that for the tail, shuck, whatever you want to call it. And we've got peacock curl. I'll leave that set here for the time being. And you can see we've got some elk hair, and we'll come back and get some of that here in a moment. And I'm going to start by just starting my thread base right here at the hook eye. And I'll just quickly wrap to the end of the shank. And I'll go back to my starting point. Now we'll take some of this antron. And by the way, I've already straightened this antron out several weeks ago. This is one of the demonstrations that we did for all of you, if you'll recall. And this is just a piece left over from that demonstration. We use the same heat gun and everything. And we're just going to use this for the tail, shuck, whatever you want to call it. Now I'll just, there we go. I just cut that at an angle so it's kind of tapered. Now we've got our longitudinal dubbing, or whatever you want to call it. We'll tie that on. And I'm just going to start wrapping towards the back. And I want you to notice what I'm doing, though, is I make sure I twist this around until I make sure those strands are straight in line with each other. And I'll just start working my way to the back.
You want to be careful about letting it slip through your hands too much.
It'll fray out.
It'll fray out.
But it makes a nice smooth body. And in this particular one, it's kind of a mottled effect, but you can get the tan ones, red, green. There's about 5 or 6 colors that you can get that are pretty good for fly tying. And then there's a whole bunch of blues and purples and stuff that is actually, this yarn is made for knitting sweaters, I assume. But anyway, now we get to the back, and we're just going to go ahead and rib forward with our thread. I'll trim off the waist. Now there's sometimes we don't put a tail on and we just use what's left over here that I want to cut off now. Just let a piece of that hang out the back as a tail, and that works just as well too. But I'll trim that just like that is right now. Now let's just take a close look on that just to see. Now that makes a pretty smooth looking body. It's kind of a mottled gray. And now I'm going to get over here and get a little bundle of this elk hair. Not a big bundle, because all it's going to be is just a kind of a wing case and a emerger type of a wing. In fact, I probably should have showed you what one looks like. This is where we're headed. And you'll notice that one had a tail made out of the actual body material. I'll get my hair stacker out. Let's see what we got here.
And you wouldn't have to stack it. But we always kind of stack the hair. We used to argue with Gary LaFontaine about that. He
Oh,
didn't stack his
he
hair.
never stacked anything. He just stuck it on the hook, and what was too long, he just sort of cut it off with the scissors. He was well, he didn't believe in doing a lot of that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm going to just make this the bundle as long as the complete hook and just a touch more. Now I'll just trim that off and tie that on right up here at the hook eye. Tighten that up just like that. Notice when I pull down, I kind of pulled back a little bit rather than straight down, because if I had pulled straight down, it would just slip off of that real close to the end application that I was doing. Now I'm going to wrap back a short distance. And we'll just leave that hang there for the moment. And I'll reach over here and grab my peacock, and I'll just grab a couple of those out of there. I'll trim off the curlies on the end. And whenever I do peacock chenille, unlike a lot of people, I tie it in by the tip. That's because I'm going to make a thread core in my peacock chenille. And how do I do the chenille? Well, as I wrap the two together and I just start wrapping. And each time I make a turn around the hook, I'm putting a twist of the material around the thread core. Working my way forward until I get up to the front up here. Take a turn around the hook. Around the front, around the back. Trim that away. Now, just like tying a humpy, we've talked about that in the past, you can pull this hair forward all you want. You'll never get the hump tight. You'll have to push it tight from right there. I missed a couple of strands. Let me get those. Yeah, in fact, there, scissors will change that. I'm going to pull that forward, hold it with my right hand, and then I'm going to push right here with my left, and then relax slightly with my left, and that tightens up that hump. Same as tying humpy dry flies. This is the same maneuver. And I'll get my whip finish tool out here. Put the whip finish in there. Trim the thread. Get my shuck sticking out, or my wing sticking out there over the front. And there you have a no-name Spring Creek fly. Just tie it in a little bit smaller sizes than what we did here. Any questions? Well,
Al, where does that sit in the water column when you fish it?
it sets in the water column kind of the way you want to. Why don't you go back to the vise there, Gretch? Tilt it up like this.
So that
I like to
your
set
hair
it.
would be sticking up?
Yeah, what I like to do is I like to take my fly floating and put it on the hump and the wing, if you want to call that a wing, or the crippled
Okay.
part or whatever. And it ends up setting in the water just like this, with this above, this kind of right in the surface film, and the rest of it below. And what I do is I put fly sink, not float, but fly sink on the
Okay.
body and on the shuck.
Huh.
So it'll set in the water, assuming that let me quit bouncing around here, assuming that my needle is the water line. That's the way it sets.
Okay.
It's what we call a foundation fly. It started as a Spring Creek fly tied by a buddy I fished with. And all that is a general idea of what you can do. The tail can be, it started out originally as a pheasant tail, and then the butt ends of the pheasant was brought forward and pulled back over for the wing case, and a little bit of tuft sticking out back. That's the way the original started out, with a dubbed body and a wire rib. And over the years, it's just evolved into whatever you have laying in your fly tying table can become your next emerger. And it's just, as I said, a foundation fly. That's just a basic idea, but whatever materials you want on it.